Hey, I wanted to share a story with you. I guess this is kind of a reminder. I usually greet my fans as flying monkeys and folks who stop by as sports fans. This stuff is too sobering. I wrote the definitive book on child sex slave trafficking, eaters of children, that I really don't get very much credit for. And it still is a very difficult topic. So let me go to this story here. You know, as I have said so many times before, first of all, as my background, having been born and raised Roman Catholic, and then having become a born-again Christian in 1994, has radically altered my view. And in the face of just unbelievable evil across millennia, no exaggeration, indescribable evil across millennia, is both the Roman Empire, but much, much worse is the Roman Catholic Empire. And I've tried to describe this, tried to describe Roman Catholicism as a war crime. And if you have no visibility on any of the facts, then you call me a whatever, crazy prejudice. But as I said, you clearly have no visibility on the facts. And as a Christian, I can only describe what I've seen the Catholic Church has done and continues to do as satanic. And the level of control the Catholic Church has in its ability to commit these indescribably heinous crimes and get away with them, to me as a Christian, is also satanic. I have no other words to describe it. Canada, I've got, at least 3 members of my, how many are we? 6 man team are Canadian, and that's probably because I'm hoping God has a sense of irony and justice in what we do. The amount of abuse that has occurred in Canada by the Catholic Church is directly related to the amount of control the Catholic Church has in Canada. This is a story from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. All of these sources. I just bought the movie Spotlight, which is pure propaganda in how the Boston Globe did its job. Utter baloney, utter propaganda. It was cleared, and amazingly, in being cleared to do its job, both the Spotlight investigation series and the movie are excellent on the facts, just full of crap on how this was the Globe. This was Rome. This was the Vatican giving its puppets in propaganda plausible deniability, because they never do their job, and so they had to, and they had lost credibility. Same thing with the Canadian. Same thing with all major media. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of showing you how controlled everything is, especially the major media. The headline of this is the most, I think, the most in-depth article on this Ontario day school. The horrors of St. Anne's. Ontario Provincial Police files obtained by CBC News reveal the history of abuse at the notorious residential school that built its own electric chair. Starts off talking about preteen girls choking themselves in the bathroom to get a false high because they were so miserable. Now, to my understanding, the vast majority of students at the school were Cree Indians. And another thing that is absolutely amazing to me, and I have no other way to describe it other than to say, as a Christian, that's satanic in its success. No entity has brutalized Indigenous peoples as much as the Catholic Church, and yet the Catholic Church is able to step back and froth up racial divide and hatred over the issue and blame everybody else. Absolutely amazing to me. Absolutely amazing. Okay, kids, girls getting high. Victims now in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. One girl told police investigators that this in and of itself is an absolute joke, and I'll show you at the end of this article why this is a joke. Police investigation. She told police investigation needed to escape constant strappings, whippings, and sexual assaults. This shouldn't have happened to us, she said. They're God's workers. They were to look after us. Well, there's the problem right there. And there's part of what makes this so sinister. As these clergy are supposed to have Christian compassion, and they are not Christian, and they are not compassionate. And they use that disguise and deception to worm their way in, use and abuse the most innocent and most vulnerable. And for lack of ability to describe it, that to me is the essence of satanic. Transcript of the interview is among thousands of pages of Ontario Provincial Police, which we will now say OPP, records, a sprawling investigation into the abuse at St. Anne's. Sprawling investigation. Wait till you see the results of the thousands of pages of sprawling investigation. As I've told you repeatedly, when these frauds in government, in so-called law enforcement and politics, need to ameliorate the anger of the citizenry over refusing to do their jobs, they have I don't even call it an investigation. They have hearings, all fluff, all hot air, no substance. The only thing that matters is bringing monsters to justice, and it never happens. Never. Investigation began in November of 1992. Over the next 6 years, OPP interviews 700 victims and witnesses and gathered 900 statements about assaults, sexual assaults, suspicious deaths, which would be murder, and multitude of abuses alleged to have occurred at the school between 1941 and 1972. Investigators identified 74 suspects and charged 7. 5 were convicted. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll scroll to the end. They want to push this. So let's hit that again. I'll show you the picture and then I'll read it for you what happened. Oh, this is the fire. So this is the fire that mysteriously burned down all the evidence. Hate when that happens. And let me give you those numbers again. Sprawling investigation, thousands of pages, 900 statements, 700 victims, only 74 suspects, charged only 7, 5 were convicted. What were they convicted of? Ann Wesley received an 11-month conditional sentence. What is a conditional sentence? Jane Kakaichawan given a 6-month conditional sentence. By the way, neither of these are Roman Catholic clergy. These are Cree, and neither of these are Roman Catholic clergy. John Moses Rodrigue, a cook. Claude Lambert, a child care worker. Marcel Blaise worked in the kitchen. Not a single Roman Catholic clergy member. Not one. Conditional 6-month sentence. Sentenced to 18 months in jail, 8 months in jail. Marcel Blaise did not receive jail time. Sprawling investigation. Not a single member of the Roman Catholic clergy that committed these crimes. I'm because I don't have words, I'll just let that sit with you. You describe it. From 2008 to 2014, the federal government omitted references that the Canadian government omitted references to the Ontario Provincial Police investigation. Canadian government helped to cover it up, including the convictions. Why? Why would the Canadian government help to cover it up? Because the Canadian government works for the Catholic Church. From the official St. Anne's record known as the school narrative, used during compensation hearings created by the 2006 Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement. Oh, the 2006 Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement. What is that? That is when the Catholic Church rapes and abuses the Indians of Canada. The Canadian taxpayers pay for it. It's a great scam, and I've told you about it repeatedly. The school narrative is a key piece of evidence for compensation cases heard under the agreement's independent assessment process. Adjudicators who hear survivor stories can refer to the school narrative as one way to determine the veracity of the claim. So the government has been charging the Canadian taxpayer for the rape, torture, and murder of children, many of them Canadian Indian children, charged the Canadian taxpayer. And in that process, they cheat many of the victims out of the taxpayer money that should be coming from the Catholic Church. Civil settlements aside, they should be watching these barbaric monsters hang on the gallows. That is not going to happen anywhere in the world, because the Roman Catholic Church runs the injustice system and has destroyed justice. The capital punishment isn't even available in the vast majority of these far-left fiefdoms of Rome. In the case of St. Anne's, adjudicators relied on school narrative and said there was no record of sexual assaults or student-on-student abuse cases. And that's another aspect of this. When you create a system of unbelievable abuse, you encourage the children to prey upon other children. The school narrative referred to only 4 recorded cases of physical abuse. 700 victims, 900 testimonies. Only 4 cases. Yet the Federal Justice Department obtained the OPP files from the investigation in 2003 after a group of St. Anne survivors filed an abuse lawsuit in Cochrane, Ontario, against Ottawa and Catholic entities that ran the school. The case ended with a settlement. And that's the only thing that's ever going to happen. And it happens because the Catholic Church steals the money to buy off the victims. Doesn't use its own. 2014 ruling, Ontario Superior Court forced the Harper government to disclose OPP files and documents from the civil action in Cochrane to St. Anne survivors. The school narrative used in the IAP hearings grew from 12 pages to 1,200 pages, 1,200 pages, and more than 12,000 documents. Litigation is continued. Following the ruling as it emerged, some St. Anne survivors lost compensation cases because adjudicators doubted the veracity of their claims. So, as these poor victims came to get paid by the Canadian taxpayer, they were cheated. Survivors want the Ontario Court of Appeal to force the government to turn over testimony transcripts from the Cochrane hearing. And I did thank Flying Monkey Nicole in Melbourne, Australia, for giving me this reminder, right? Just in case I'll do that again. It's a reminder because I'm sure I've come across this. I just am now taking the time to look at the details that are deeply upsetting, as usual. Some survivors have spoken out, written books about their experiences at the school, including in some cases being shocked in a homemade electric chair. So, Roman Catholic clergy running schools, running orphanages, is basically giving children to Satan. These are people who are forced to spend their lives in sexual and emotional frustration, in misery and anger, and serving the Catholic Church, pretending to serve Jesus Christ and God. And as a result, they become the rawest instruments of Satan, of evil, if you're not Christian. Evidence has never been shared. Evidence has never been shared with the public. The school was run by the Catholic Orders of Oblates of Mary Immaculate and the Grey Sisters of the Cross from 1902 until 1976. The federal government, the Canadian government, funded the school. How is that even possible? Happens in secular America all the time. The Catholic Church conducts the crimes. The taxpayers pay it to do so. The taxpayers created these so-called schools. Now, whose idea do you think it was to create a school for Canadian Indians? Have the Canadian taxpayer pay for it, but let's go ahead and have Roman Catholic priests and nuns manage the school and do whatever they want. So desirous to cause pain and harm to these innocent children, they created an instrument of torture, electric chair. They all should be sitting in an electric chair. 5 convictions, none of them Roman Catholic clergy. 5 convictions, none of them anything more than 18 months. What's that word again? Conditional sentence. Don't even know what that is. That probably means they got the Epstein treatment. No television on Wednesday night. Only a small shack remains of St. Anne's today. The school, the nuns, the residence, the rectory. The school, the nuns' residence, and the rectory burned down within the last 15 years. I hate when that happens. All the evidence. It's interesting. So here we are. We have an in-depth story of the 5 and their conditional sentence, and one of them served no jail time at all. And after all this, there's no evidence left. All the survivors interviewed by the Ontario Provincial Police during the investigation described suffering or witnessing multiple abuses, physical, sexual, and psychological. At one point in the transcript, a victim described a straitjacket. Because, hey, we don't want these children to be able to fight back when they're raping them, torturing them, beating them. She told investigators it was grayish beige color, made tough material like denim. Zippers front and back, sleeves had fringes to bind the arms together around your body. She remembered one time having her period. She resisted a nun rubbing her breast, stomach, and between her legs. A confused, angry look took her face. Then she said, "You've the devil inside you, and we have to get the devil out." So the nun put the straitjacket on the girl to sexually assault her through her period. It was almost like she got a thrill out of it, the survivor said. Then the survivor said, "I can't talk about this anymore." The nun was never charged. There we go. There's the picture I'm at. Let me scroll up for you. Here it is. Look at these wonderful people. Look at this dehumanizing getup that the Catholic Church puts its women in to make them vicious, brutal, bitter, angry. Nuns, priests, and lay brothers would hit students with large straps, small whips, beaver snare wire. That's a lovely thing in and of itself. There's evil coming back on evil. Trapping. Boards, books, rulers, yardsticks, fists, and open hands, survivors told investigators. They're not investigators. They're frauds. Sometimes students were locked in the dark basement for hours at a time. They also told investigators about being force-fed porridge, spoiled fish, cod liver oil, rancid horse meat, and made students sick to the point of vomiting on their plates. And then they were forced to eat their vomit. Again, I can you think of anything more evil? This is Roman Catholicism. This is Roman Catholic clergy. Unpunished to this day. There were numerous allegations of sexual abuse involving nuns, priests, and lay brothers, as well as staff, ranging from fondling, forced kissing, violent attacks, rape, nighttime molestation. One survivor in her 50s at the time of her August 93 interview. Oh, by the way, okay, so this is a 1993 investigation that netted no convictions, and we're now talking about in the Canadian press. With OPP investigators, she said she remembered a staff member who targeted 5 girls for sexual abuse during her time. It's a staff member. Lasted from 51 to 55. The survivor, who began attending at school at age 11, said the staff member would take a different girl every night. Why not? Just smorgasbord of rape. She said she once snuck upstairs with her cousin and a friend to the boys' section, peeked through the door, and found 2 boys lying naked on separate beds, and said, "I remember hearing the boys screaming." She told Nation Band Police, Taikwa Tagamau Nation Band Office near Cochrane, 120 kilometers north of Timmins. A survivor who attended St. Anne's in the 1960s said an older student once lured him into the basement with the promise of a prize and basically got a gang beating. And as I said, this is a Lord of the Flies situation where these monstrous clergy encourage the children to rape and beat each other. Absolute cesspool of Satan. Beaten so badly, he blacked out. When I came to, all the boys were gone. Ropes were taken off by his supervisor. He had to be taken to a hospital. Oh, they hung him, by the way. Just short of death. They hung him just short of death. Nothing happened. OPP contacted former supervisor, but he claimed he couldn't remember. Investigators found the former nun who worked at the hospital said she couldn't remember the boy. I hate when that happens. Investigation record is replete with allegations of staff actively participating in or facilitating student-on-student physical and sexual abuse. Encouraged it, just like I told you. They encouraged it. A culture of rape and torture. That's what they wanted. There are also stories of student-on-student gang rapes and beatings. See if I can get to the text for you. Student-on-student gang rapes and beatings encouraged by the Catholic clergy. In one OPP interview, a male survivor recalled during the 56-57 school year, a nun ordered 8 boys to hold him down as she whipped him 27 times. In another interview, a woman who attended the St. Anne's between 63 and 71 described how a school supervisor would pick on certain children she considered slow and humiliated a girl by forcing her to wear toilet paper around her neck to class. I'm just going to leave the picture up for you, and I'll have the article link in the About section. So these are children who need special care, and the special care they got from this Roman Catholic clergy was to be humiliated and brutalized. How about that for compassion? How about that for compassion? Even after a 2014 court decision forcing Ottawa to turn over the OPP files to the survivors, the Justice Department continued to use the incomplete narrative. That's justice in Canada, run by the Catholic Church. One survivor known in court records as H15019 lost his compensation claim because he wasn't believed. During his IAP hearing in July 2014, Justice Department lawyers relied on the incomplete school narrative despite possessing proof a priest mentioned in the compensation claim was a serial sex abuser. Justice in Canada. The court granted him a new hearing and eventually secured his compensation, which was paid for by the Canadian taxpayer. Well, justice has been served. The federal government's handling of St. Anne's related documents is part of a pattern, according to filings before the Ontario Court of Appeal in the St. Anne's disclosure case. You wouldn't say that. A part of a pattern? Really? Survivors say the federal government has a history of reluctant, contradictory, and inconsistent disclosure of documentation of abuse at residential schools. Why would the Canadian government do that? It's almost as if the Canadian government were covering for the monstrosities of the Catholic Church. They provide several examples, victims do, survivors, including a case from 1998 where a former student of a Port Alberni Indian residential school on Vancouver Island sued Ottawa over abuse. Again, want the taxpayers to pay something because you're certainly not going to get justice. During the case, which reached the Supreme Court, Indian Affairs claimed it only knew of 5 cases of sexual assault at the residential school across the country over a 50-year period. However, between only 2 years, 94 and 96, the department had identified a possible 91 cases of physical and sexual abuse at the schools and asked the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to investigate it. I'm sure they did a great job. In 1994, the Indian and National Affairs Department refused to hand over documentation to an RCMP task force. One government agency refused to give the evidence. Refused. Because you have possession of crimes committed. That means you yourself are committing a crime. Were these individuals arrested? Of course not. Task force investigation cases in British Columbia, forcing the Mounties to obtain multiple search warrants for the department's head offices in Hull, Quebec, according to the court appeal findings. Even the Truth and Reconciliation Commission faced difficulty obtaining records of criminal convictions related to residential school abuse from the Indian Affairs. The department told the commission it didn't have them. The TRC concluded otherwise, but was forced to complete its final report without them. Again, you know the evidence exists. You're told it's not, so you let it go with that. This electric chair. A homemade electric chair created for the purpose of torturing the children. Armrests and wires to a battery. I was scared, one victim said. He hit the switch 2 or 3 times as I sat in the chair. I got shocked. It's hard to describe. Then she started to cry, the adult victim recounting what happened. OPP records indicate the former student said she was put in the chair and shocked until she passed out. Another says she was told she would have to sit in the chair if she wanted to speak to her mother. By the way, residential school. These were not orphans. These children are being raped, tortured, and in some cases murdered. And one victim said, I could see my house right out of the window. Not allowed to go home. And they stayed there overnight. And this is the fault of the parents, whether they understood what was going on or not. You gave your children away to these monsters 6 days a week. Almost 7. I think the story is that they were allowed to come home for 3 hours on Sunday. Wow, does it get any better than that? Have your children and give them over to a Roman Catholic day school. Basically 7 days a week. And as a result, they were raped, tortured, and in some cases murdered. I blame the parents. One survivor in an interview with police in February of 93 said 2 lay brothers made the students stand in a circle holding the electric chair armrest, as a student was also forced in the chair. They thought it was funny to make as many of the children be shocked and suffer as possible. There were stories about the death of a boy who fell from a swing, supposedly. Another boy supposedly drowned while ice skating. One survivor told police a boy was beaten to death for stealing a communion wafer. One survivor told police a boy was beaten to death for stealing a communion wafer. You don't do that to the Catholic Church, not even if you're a little boy. Then there were the disappearances of 3 boys, John Kioki, Michael Matanas, and Michael Sutherland. 14 years old, 11 years old, and 13 years old. The trio left St. Anne's with a 4th boy in the early morning of all dates, April 19th, 1941. Well, that tells me this was Satan behind all this. April 19th, 1941. The official story is the boys turned up missing. Let me scroll to the end. A victim. See if I've got the video here. All right, stand by. Chris Matawabin. They have the video testimony of Chris Matawabin. I assume I'm saying that right. And he explains that the boys were brought back and murdered. And they were beat with a cat of 9 tails, an ancient instrument of torture, a Roman instrument of torture. And this survivor says it was absolutely accurate. Historically, it's like they pulled out of the Inquisition basement. It had bits of metal in the straps, and the boys were whipped until their flesh was ripped, and they bled so profusely it hit the floor. Clearly, they were beat to death. Just disappeared. RCMP and Indian Affairs official were not informed of the boy's disappearance until June 6th, D-Day of 1941. Tell me this doesn't have spiritual undertones of deep satanic power. The boys were assumed to have been drowned. Their bodies were never recovered. The whole affair is regrettable, and parents' indignation is understandable, an RCMP constable said in dispatch to superiors in 1941. Doesn't seem to be anything further we can do, so the file is considered closed. Investigation. If you had spoken to any one of these children, you would have had the impetus for a more serious investigation. It wasn't in their interest. Surrounded by deaths and disappearances, constant fear and violence, the survivors interviewed by the OPP spoke about attempted suicide, and several did, struggles with addictions and broken lives. Crimes in the Catholic Church last forever. Lives crippled by a childhood living at a school. I craved for and was sick for love, a survivor told an OPP investigator. I'll give you some notes on another incident. So, children, not another, this is a note, this incident leading into another incident. By the way, let me look up something for you here. So Eric, phenomenal Canadian member of my team, found this article from the New York Times. Also, World War II era, of nuns in Bavaria torturing and murdering children. One nun murdered 210 children, mostly by injection. How about that for you anti-vaxxers? This New York Times included how she claimed to be a Lutheran and didn't follow up. A Lutheran. Don't you believe in God? I'm a Lutheran. This matter doesn't concern you. I'm a Lutheran. Because that's what you have in Bavaria, in Munich. You got Lutherans in Bavaria, right? And Lutherans have clergy like priests and nuns, right? For some reason, the New York Times didn't think it was necessary to follow up on that. Children were given numbers like concentration camp prisoners. Children were given numbers. It's easier to rape, torture, and murder them that way. Clergy were extremely racist to the Indian children. The hierarchy was thoroughly stratified. They were not allowed to speak their native language. The damage was incalculable. Monsters incorporated Christian rationalization for their outrages. I read an example for you. crushing very souls. Many of the abused turned to drugs. Many became dysfunctional, sometimes even abusers themselves. Many of the abused questioned their sexuality and turned to homosexuality. Some took their own lives. In a different investigation by the Fifth Estate, okay? Canadian journalism, the Fifth Estate, abuse in the Catholic Church in Nova Scotia. One victim, Ronald Martin, they asked him, why didn't you tell your parents? He said devout Catholic parents would punish their children for saying such things. He said he was suicidal through his teen years. He internalized deep fear over the abuse well into his adult and married life. He had a 14-child family, all given to the hands of the child-raping priests. His brother David killed himself as an adult and left a suicide note saying he could not live with the shame of his abuse. Now Martin carries even more guilt. He said, had I forced myself to talk about it, David might not have killed himself. The priest, once he turned 80, Hugh MacDonald, voluntarily returned to Cape Breton from Ontario to face 23 sex assault charges, but died before the trial. That's the way it usually goes. The Fifth Estate, Canadian journalism, then praised Bishop of Antigonish, Nova Scotia, Raymond Leahy, for being eager to pay victims rather than haggling, until he was arrested on child pornography charges. Let me get that for you. There he is. Very eager. Now, prior to this, 3 earlier bishops did everything they could to cover up the abuse. And by the way, the formula is, you only find out about priests. You never hear of the bishops, cardinals, and popes raping children. That's by design. And even then, the bishops and cardinals cover up the abuse of the priests. 2002 example of an example in 2002 of a judge throwing out the civil case because it was unfair to the pedophile priest. The Canadian taxpayers of Ottawa spent $2.3 million paying the rape victims of the Catholic Church. I'll get you that one. Hang on. Sorry for the rough transition there. $2.3 million. The taxpayers of Canada. You see this here? How is all this possible? How is all this possible? New Democrat Party member of Canadian Parliament for Timmins and James Bay, Charles Joseph Charlie Angus, said, hey, this is just a vendetta. This is just a vendetta to make the Canadian taxpayers pay for the rape, torture, and murder of Indian children. Just a vendetta. Who is Charlie Angus? Born in Timmins, Ontario, the member of Canadian Parliament, co-founded a punk band. Isn't that cute? Songs were influenced by The Clash and the group's Catholic social justice roots. Angus is a progressive. That's code for far-left communist. He's all about Jesuit social justice. A devout member of the Catholic Church and the Catholic worker movement, Catholic communism. That is how this is all possible. Roman Catholicism is a war crime, and there will not be any justice until the entire system is torn asunder. They run it. And it's time to burn it down.